Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Redemption in a Worthy World in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 6, A New Beginning. Sasuke was woken up by a foot nudging at his side and he rolled away, only to shriek as he toppled away from the table leg he'd been leaning on. He caught himself with his arms, then winced as the cuts on his palms reopened. Naruto sniggered slightly, but neither spoke. Together they collected the medical supplies as Sasuke changed the bandages or replaced the ones Naruto had torn off. Neither spoke about the previous night, but the air was calm. Something had changed. Once the supplies had been collected, they started in on the blood. Naruto's quarter roll of paper towels was soon exhausted, so Sasuke gestured at his ruined shirt. Might as well use this, it's already done for anyway. He pulled it over his head and they used it to mop up the last drops, heedless of the stains it left on the Uchiha fan. Naruto jerked his head towards a doorway to Sasuke's left. Showers straight through there. Soap and stuff is on the left. If you're lucky you'll get some hot water, but Chioke-san never gives me any. Both their voices were hoarse, but neither commented on it. Sasuke silently nodded and closed the door behind him. As he mechanically went through the motions of undressing and figuring out the shower, which was indeed ice cold no matter which way he turned it, he re-evaluated Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto was loud, obnoxious, rude, foolish, and gross. He always had the wrong answer in class, if he bothered to pay attention or even show up. His clone jutsu was pathetic and his dream of becoming Hokage was a fool's fantasy. Still, Naruto had pulled him through that window late at night and shared his meager medical supplies without prompting. He had let Sasuke sleep in his house, even after they had fought like that, and seemed to ignore that Sasuke had broken his nose. He wasn't given hot water by his landlord, and when an unknown man with a knife had asked where to find Uzumaki Naruto, the villagers had laughed and wished him good luck. Sasuke had thought the worst thing in the world was to be looked at with pity by others. He didn't think they thought about Naruto at all. If they did, it was with hate. Sasuke thought that was worse. He stepped out of the shower to find Naruto's jacket and another pair of worn sandals, all orange and blue, laid carefully next to the sink. To his relief, his pants and underwear remained untouched. Sasuke didn't think he could handle Naruto messing around with his underwear. Hair still slightly damp despite the towel, he walked out to find Naruto wearing his old white shirt and green shorts, stacking the unopened ramen cups that had fallen over from their fight. "Showers free," Sasuke remarked. "You were right though, no hot water." Naruto seemed to expect this and passed into the bathroom. "I'll be out in a minute, hang on." Sasuke sat down at the table and idly began to match the scattered chopsticks as he continued to think. Naruto could outrun and outsmart the Umbu Black Ops and knew them enough to identify specific members, even if they were going easy on him. He knew the Hokage well enough to call him Jiji, and paid attention to what happened in his district, even if the people despised him. Villagers loathed him and neither of them knew why. Indra Uchiha, if that was his real name, seemed to want Sasuke to find Naruto, and the more Sasuke thought, the more he seemed to agree. He hadn't been able to get an appointment out of the sickly smiling Chunin in the administrative building, but, with Naruto's knowledge of the Umbu and his ability to be ear-splittingly loud when he wanted to, Sasuke could see possibilities. At least, if Naruto could keep his mouth shut and not be a blabbermouth. But then, Naruto had plenty of questions he wanted answers to as well. He looked up as Naruto re-emerged, wearing the same clothes as well as his familiar goggles, and pulled a plate from the fridge with a grin. Sasuke stared as Naruto sat across from him in the cramped kitchen and began to eat. "Are those wilt mushrooms?" grinned Naruto around a mouthful of the stuff. Sasuke took a tentative bite of an enormous one, shrugged, and continued eating. "They grow out near the Naka River or near the training grounds, and I pick 'em if I've eaten too much Ichiraku ramen, if I need to wait for money from Jiji, or if the shopkeepers raise prices again." Sasuke swallowed heavily and resolved to take smaller bites. Naruto had already eaten half the plate and was likely to eat the other quarter. They were very big mushrooms, to be fair. "Do you have, like, a budget?" "That helps." Sasuke knew about budgets. As the sole Uchiha, the accumulated wealth of one of the four noble clans of Konoha would last him a long time indeed, but Sasuke had to sign a great many budgets and land deeds the last time he'd had to see the Hokage. Naruto shrugged and looked deliberately casual. Oh yeah, but like I said, sometimes the shops around here and down in the marketplace switch things around and charge me more for stuff. Say I shouldn't be greedy. And it's supposed to be my birthday, too, he added under his breath. Sasuke, whose thoughts had been bubbling under the surface, boiled over and he lunged forward to grab Naruto's arm. What, you want the last one? Go ahead. That's not it. Naruto, when's your birthday? The blonde gave him an odd look. October 10th, why? Sasuke let go and cast about the room wildly for a calendar. Because that's the week when all Uchiha were confined to the district. Father made it an official police order, too. I remember because he got yelled at a lot because of it, but he would never change his mind. Naruto shrugged. What's that got to do with anything? It's the same day the Kyuubi attacked and everyone's got a chip on their shoulders about it. People get drunk and call me cursed, Demon Spawn, just cause I was born on the same day. Just dummies getting superstitious, you know. Sasuke shook his head. No, don't you get it? Your birthday, the Kyuubi attack, my clan hiding in our district, they're all linked. I've got other stuff I want to ask Hokage-sama about too, like my mom. Maybe we can find out about your parents too. The boy across from him lit up like the sun and Sasuke felt the need to shield his eyes. You really mean that? What makes you think Jiji will answer you when he never told me anything? Sasuke drew himself up and put on his most pompous, arrogant expression. I am technically the head of the Uchiha clan and as such, have a seat on the Konoha Council. He matched Naruto's grin with his own. The Hokage has to answer my questions. Naruto leapt out of his chair, suddenly a white and yellow blur as he ran around the room. Are you sure? Are you really sure, you know? I'm sure. Naruto cheered, then froze as Sasuke somehow managed to put a hand on his arm. I'm going to need to go home to get some stuff for the Hokage's office. He paused, torn between one possibility and the next, but shook it off. Do you want to come with me? The compound is pretty close by. The look Naruto gave him could not have more clearly said if he had spelled it out in fireworks. In the light of day, the street looked even more shabby, the surrounding buildings even more run down. Sasuke looked at the broken bottles and rubbish in the stairwell with disdain but said nothing. Naruto was probably embarrassed enough as it was. The boy drifted to the side as they reached the street and Sasuke looked around in irritation. Keep up, I want to get this done today. Yeah, keep my shirt on, muttered Naruto as he slid something into his back pocket. Whatever. It was late morning when they left and some of the shops were still open, even on a Sunday. Sasuke saw a few residents stare in surprise as Naruto trailed along after the boy wearing his jacket and could feel their stares. He turned and opened his mouth before Naruto elbowed him in the side. Ignore them, he muttered, they're wondering why the wonder of the Uchiha is down here with us. The wonder of the Uchiha said nothing, but unbeknownst to either child, his eyes blazed red every step of the way out of Kanrokugai district. Chapter 7, A Rare Ceremony, The Fox Stirs. As soon as he saw the familiar red and white fan of the Uchiha on the estate walls, Sasuke began to relax. The Uchiha estate and the police compound had both been built next to a prison, impregnable and inviolate, their own little slice of the village. Of course, that also left it painfully empty. Naruto was gazing around as if every tree and shingle were brand new. Sasuke shuddered slightly, unsettled at how enthusiastic Naruto was when Sasuke could still see that day if he closed his eyes. Your own hot springs, your own yard, all sorts of stuff. Anyway, what are you even gonna get here, anyway? Sasuke beckoned for Naruto to follow him and took a path towards the main entrance to his home. He may have been showing off just a little. First, a change of clothes, so you can have your jacket back. It's yours and I shouldn't be wearing it after I've already smashed your window and everything. Naruto chuckled and swung his arms behind his head and for the first time, Sasuke could see that his smile was genuine. No problem. That's hospitality, you know. Exactly. So I'm going to wear something more formal, or as formal as I can, he added, glancing down at his skinny frame. The formal clan head robes won't work, but I've got my father's official seal and the clan scrolls, which you'll need to help me carry. The blonde's eyes grew as wide as saucers. Even though he hadn't paid attention in class that much, clan scrolls were still a really big deal. Carefully, Sasuke added as they turned the corner. Carry them carefully. Naruto saluted, his hand at his forehead, and adopted his own impression of a pompous noble. Of course, most honored clan head Uchiha. It would be my honor to be crushed under the weight of the ancient and most venerable scrolls. Sasuke barely noticed as they passed into his front garden. Where did you pick up the word venerable? You barely passed our last written test. Hey, I pay attention sometimes, you know. The walk from the Uchiha district to the center of the village was a long one, and they were not subtle. In fact, subtlety was the opposite of what Sasuke wanted to achieve. After replacing Naruto's jacket with one of his own blue, high-collared Uchiha shirts, Sasuke had excavated the dojo armory, still thick with dust, with conspicuous gaps in the weapon racks, and found a suit of armor that best fit him. It was old, possibly from the first Great Ninja War, or before, when clans sent their children to die and villages had not yet formed as they were now. Sasuke had found a set, likely ceremonial, that had been constructed for one Uchiha child or another. Likely another son of a clan head, but beyond that it was impossible to say. The armor was bright red, with some kind of lacquer that made it shine in the sun. The main chest plate, as well as the Sode and Kasazuri plates on his shoulders and thighs were heavy, and he could already tell he was going to sweat through this shirt, though the Uchiha symbol on the back stood proudly, a sign that the Uchiha never took a wound in the back and always faced their enemy. If that was also how they could use their Sharingan, well, it helped the legend. And today, Sasuke was leaning on the legend of the Uchiha pretty hard. He silently whispered a prayer to his ancestors, particularly the legendary Madara, that he did not shame them, that he did not look like a fool. The short sword strapped to his belt helped at least, as well as the bandage on his forehead. He thought the Sasuke in the mirror looked intimidating. Behind him, Naruto carried the massive scroll Sasuke had been poring over for the last day and a half. He'd declined to wear any robes, perhaps wisely, but did enjoy the large conical Jingasa hat that hid his face from onlookers and occasionally jingled small bells to warn of their passage. His orange jacket was still a dead giveaway though. The scroll was, as Sasuke had promised, heavy, but it seemed to get lighter the further they traveled into the village, as they drew closer to the Hokage mountain. Jiji had all sorts of old scrolls like that, usually big, and from far away, with strange rules. One marked with the symbol of the hidden stone had to be chained down, else it would float off back towards its mountain home far to the west. They walked down Blossom Boulevard, past the training grounds, where Ninja turned in surprise at hearing the bells, then at seeing samurai armor in the village rather than green flak jackets. Every 20 or so steps, Naruto would call out, "Make way for the Lord Uchiha, make way, make way." He was making progress, for Sasuke was twitching much less every time he said it. Every ninja or even civilian who thought to jeer or make some snide remark was swiftly silenced, if not by their fellows, then by the look on Sasuke's face. This was important. This was his way to get information that could not be hidden or destroyed. This would remind the Leaf Village that the Uchiha clan still lived, that they could, and should, still command respect. They had made contracts with dragons, the legends said, in those long ago days before even Madara, when men shaped chakra and forged the first summoning contracts with blood and bone. On this day, Sasuke was Uchiha, and he was mighty. It took 2.5 long, hot, painful hours to reach the administration building, and news had traveled ahead of them. The Hokage had assembled an Umbu guard and most of the village council, including the elders, the Jonin commander Shikaku, and many of the clan heads. Sasuke nodded his head slightly as he saw the Akimichi, the Hyuga, and the Aburame among them. Hokage-sama had brought the other noble clans, good. We're being taken seriously. He whispered back to Naruto who, thank the gods, had stopped his ridiculous announcements once he saw the Hokage. Is that a good thing? I'll let you know later. Sasuke swallowed and felt his mouth dry up, though the air of Konoha was still its usual hot and humid. He forced himself not to repeat the gesture and raised his right hand, the left clutched around the hilt of his short sword. The Uchiha have come to the Hokage, by custom and law. As we are bound to the village, so is he. In the name of these, ancient bonds, we seek counsel in this dark hour. The Hokage has broken our sacred bond and allowed the clan to fail. Rise, O Fire Shadow, and hear the tidings of the Uchiha. By fire we were forged and in fire we are both bound. The Hokage has failed in his duties, as a protector of the Uchiha clan, and the clan has come seeking counsel. How shall he answer? Sasuke had modified the traditional words of the proclamation, which had originally read, seeking vengeance. The Uchiha in the past were very much in favor of vengeance and had sought it frequently. This time, at least, it was not directed at the Hokage. Sasuke could wear the armor and hold the blade, but one Uchiha could not take on the whole hidden village. The crowd around them was silent, waiting for the Hokage's response. One of the counselors, a man wrapped in bandages and leaning on a cane, whispered something and conspicuously turned away, back towards the tower. Dozens of ninja around them sucked in air or quietly cursed at the magnitude of the insult. In a formal petition such as this, to show one's back implied one considered their opponent unworthy, or too cowardly to deal with an invited attack, if the opponent was to prove themselves worthy of consideration. Sasuke for one brief instant, considered drawing his sword to answer the insult, but that was even worse. To bare steel in front of the Hokage was a different matter entirely and practically marked the offender as an enemy nin. He relaxed his grip on the sword and stepped forward, closing the distance once more. There was still a good 100 feet between them. He had time, though not much, to come up with a response. He did not see the shard of black metal that flew past his ear. The broken kunai head landed just behind the counselor, point down in the packed earth. All the gathered ninja had heard it and a few of the Umbu had crouched in instinctive response, weapons drawn. Even the cicadas fell silent. We asked you a question. Naruto's voice rang across the space between them, clear and hard. There was something deeper in it, something Sasuke couldn't place, but he felt a chill run down his spine. He spun on the spot, poise gone, armor clattering, to glare at Naruto and somehow make him shut up, make the last few seconds not have happened. The Uzumaki still held his hand out, fingers splayed from where he had thrown the remnant of Sasuke's kunai. The scroll was upright, one side on the ground, straight in the air as Sasuke had read from the instructions. The shadow from his hat made it impossible to see his face, but Sasuke was sure Naruto could see the fury and horror emanating from every line of his own. Naruto slowly, deliberately, brought his hand to his hat and tipped it in respect. In the silence, the bells jingled. Silently cursing Naruto's children for 5 generations, Sasuke turned back to the Hokage. Apologies, Fire Shadow, he managed. It is midday and temperatures are quite high, as are the tempers of the Uchiha. That was good. An apology, tempered by a reminder of the Uchiha's famous volatility. Not the best way to start a negotiation, but Naruto wasn't an Uchiha anyway. He really was winging it at this point. The Hokage nodded and for an instant, Sasuke could have sworn he caught the slightest smirk on his weathered features. Understandable, Lord Uchiha. The land of fire is famous for its summers. As if they had not both lived there all their lives. Fortunately, we are famous for our hospitality as well. Counselor Danzo is getting on in years and needs to be reminded he is no longer envoy to the Mist Village, nor has he been appointed Hokage. Such a public rebuke. Sasuke had not been expecting that. Nor, seemingly, had Danzo, who was looking at the Hokage with the same amount of shock. But Sarutobi continued as if Danzo was invisible. The Fire Shadow accepts your petition, Lord Uchiha, and invites him to take counsel, as has long been the custom and right of the great clans of Konoha. No blades shall be bared, nor chakra consumed in anger as long as the trees of the leaf stand. Sasuke bowed, slightly, at the waist to convey his gratitude without straying from the ritual. Lord Uchiha accepts your petition and conditions. He knelt and placed the tanto, undrawn, on the ground, where one of the Umbu received it and carried it to the Jonin commander, who received it with all the dignity he would have given a visiting diplomat. Surprisingly, a second Umbu, with a shock of gray hair, also knelt and retrieved the kunai blade and gave it to the Jonin commander, who received it the same as before. Sasuke followed the Hokage and his retinue into the building, his mind blazing through the ritual scroll he'd read only hours before. Even though it wasn't part of the ritual, by offering the kunai as a ceremonial weapon, the Umbu had mitigated the gravity of Naruto's action. In that context, It could be read as an initial exchange of weapons, a show of trust, though it was clearly anything but. Sasuke clattered his way up the circular staircase with Naruto right behind him and prayed once again to the gods that Naruto hadn't just exiled himself. Chapter 8, Answers and the Headaches They Cause. The moment the door closed behind them, both Naruto and Sasuke exploded into apologies. They talked over one another, apologized for one another, and blamed each other in equal measure. However, they fell silent once again as the Hokage held up a hand. He still had not turned to look at them, looking out over the green expanse of Konoha. His hands moved in a series of signs too fast for Sasuke to follow, and both academy students felt as if a blanket had covered their heads, before the sensation passed. The Hokage turned back and motioned towards the desk. Sasuke saw with astonishment that he was, in fact, smiling. A silencing barrier has been erected around this office, so we may speak freely, without ceremony. I did appreciate the pomp and circumstance of your petition, though. It was a rare occasion even when I was young. He reached his desk and pulled out his pipe, seeming more a kindly old grandfather than the fire shadow of the hidden leaf. The threat against Counselor Danzo, however, was not. Ah, yes, there it was. The famous glare of the professor. Sasuke swallowed hard and glared at Naruto, who at least seemed to be deeply aware of how much he had screwed up. But Jiji, that was so rude. We and you and everyone went to all this trouble to do a formal petition, and that turnip head insulted Sasuke. He insulted you, Jiji. Even I know that, and Sasuke's the one who read all the rules. The Hokage made a quick gesture and his pipe glowed, briefly, filling the room with the smell of sandalwood and strong tobacco. Councilman Danzo has never been polite. He runs the Umbu Black Ops, so it is in his nature to be direct and to the point. He has always loathed such ceremony, save when it is for his benefit. And a formal Uchiha petition, in front of a good quarter of the village, is not to his benefit. It reminds the other clan heads of the village's failure to protect the Uchiha clan. It reminds Danzo that Itachi Uchiha was one of the Umbu under his command, technically, when he slaughtered your clan. What will happen then, Lord Hokage? Sasuke glanced at Naruto, who looked similarly worried. We have come with questions, but if we need to wait for things to calm down, we can return later. At that, Naruto looked ready to object, but the Hokage shook his head. No, speak your questions now. Counselor Danzo's dislike of the Uchiha is well known among the other clans, and this may have endeared you to some of them, if you can believe it. Still, his reach is long and the laws of the village quite clear. Naruto, keep out of trouble for at least a month, if you can. He took a deep pull from his pipe, sounding resigned. At least try not to paint the Hokage monument again. And Sasuke, you should avoid wearing that armor or any kind of weapon in the streets in the near future. You may feel strong or powerful in that armor, but it is a suggestion that the village is no longer safe. It invites a return to inter-clan strife, and I trust your lessons have covered the Mist Village. Sasuke and Naruto both nodded. The Bloody Mist was a story many of the older genin, or the cynical chunin, liked to frighten the academy students with. Even Sasuke was not aware of that particular implication of his petition. He'd simply followed the instructions outlined in the scroll. If I may be honest, Lord Hokage, the armor doesn't make me feel powerful, or any of that. It just made me nervous. And sweaty. He added lamely, in an attempt to lighten the mood. He was joking. Sasuke Uchiha, the gloomy guts of the academy. Incredible. The Hokage did chuckle, and continued to look at Sasuke over his pipe. Silent appraisal moved over him like a searchlight, and Sasuke could almost feel as the old man's gaze moved from him to Naruto. Sasuke took the opportunity to really look at the Hokage. He'd known the man was old, but up close Sasuke could see he looked old. The Sarutobi clan markings on his face hid the deep age lines, as well as laughter lines. He'd developed liver spots, and without the hat, Sasuke could see his hair was almost white, only a few strands of muddy brown left. Still, those eyes were sharp, and Sasuke knew that the man known as the Professor had attained an age almost no active shinobi would reach, and through 2 world wars. No, age had not dulled the Hokage, though it had slowed him just a fraction. He tuned back in to realize Naruto was still rambling about disrespect, that the Hokage had refused to tell him about his parents and had somehow managed to mention the Uchiha's seclusion in their compound every October. The Hokage was listening silently, nearly inscrutable, though every few minutes, Sasuke caught a vein in his neck throbbing. Not sure how else to interrupt Naruto's stream of consciousness, he raised his hand as if they were in class and the Hokage obligingly smiled at him. This, fortunately, made Naruto trail off. "So Sasuke, what questions did you have for me? They must have been important if you walked all the way here in such a manner." Sasuke collected his thoughts, some of which were still bouncing around outside, screaming he threw a knife at the head of the Umbu. "That means I threw a knife at the head of Umbu. I'm going to die within the week." He clasped his hands in front of his face and leaned forward onto the desk. "Lord Hokage, as I'm sure you are aware, yesterday a man was able to infiltrate our village. Whatever jutsu he was using failed at the wrong moment, and he fell into the academy grounds. Academy grounds sounded more grown-up than playground, anyway. He landed right in front of me and spoke the name of my clan before passing out from blood loss. He was heavily injured and missing an eye, but I am confident I had never seen that man before that moment. Then last night, I had a dream." He took a deep breath, but the Hokage was still listening. "What I am about to say will sound insane. I'm telling the truth though, really." Naruto was still listening, but the Hokage had raised one bushy eyebrow. Realizing he was sinking his own ship, Sasuke pressed on. "In my dream, I was in my home, exactly where I had been before I fell asleep. However, there was some kind of explosion that blew up the house and knocked me down. That man, along with 2 others, had fallen sideways into my dream and continued to fight within. The man in black that passed out was called Indra, by one of the others, and Warrior by the second. He identified himself to me as," he paused, trying to remember exactly how the man had said it. "Indra Uchiha, second of that name. But then, that was after the fight." The Hokage's eyebrow remained raised, though his pipe had returned to his mouth. "Describe these others, then describe the fight." "Details can come later, Sasuke. There were 2 other men, one young, one old. Both had pale skin, paler than mine, nearly white, or maybe gray, and robes to match. Both had strange rings within their eyes and it seemed to be a bloodline technique. Indra Uchiha said they were the Otsutsuki clan," he recited, stumbling slightly over the unfamiliar syllables. "Indra Uchiha was allied with the old man who he called Hage Oromo, who had lines on his face, like yours, and a beard like yours. Actually, he looked a lot like you, except he had a big red circle eye in the middle of his forehead too. He could float, though, and had horns." "A demon?" Naruto looked excitedly at the Hokage. "Was that a demon, Jiji? Have you seen anyone like that before?" The Hokage frowned and shook his head. "No, never." "Describe this second man they were fighting." "He was younger, with yellow eyes. He'd followed Indra Uchiha from somewhere dangerous and he was really angry. He and Indra could both pull weapons from the air. He had a glowing white bow and Indra had a purplish sword. I think that was because it was a dream, though." "Focus, Sasuke," said the Hokage softly. His eyes were locked onto the young Uchiha, as were Naruto's, both caught in the story as he described the fight. The speed, the defiance of gravity and grievous wounds. The blood stains that remained even when he'd woken up. "I didn't want to touch it, just in case. A wise decision. I will send a team back with you, with your permission, to collect this evidence and replace the floorboards." Sasuke nodded gratefully and plunged ahead. The yellow-eyed man stayed stuck on the ceiling, but he didn't really seem to be hurt by it, just inconvenienced. Sasuke pointed at his chest. It wasn't a nick or his clothing. All the way through. Beside him, Naruto shivered. "I wouldn't like to meet someone who could walk off being impaled." Sasuke ignored him and continued, though the Hokage's eyes flicked to the Uzumaki for just an instant. "The old man dash. Hage Oromo." Hage Oromo said that the yellow-eyed man had followed Indra through some kind of hole in space-time and that it was very dangerous. The yellow-eyed man said something about a seal, which is how I think Indra fell off our roof. The Hokage's eyes flicked once again to Naruto and this time both children noticed it. Both Hage Oromo and Indra were surprised to see me. I don't think they meant to be in my dream or were surprised there were other people around. Indra seemed to find it funny, but not really. You know, a laugh that isn't ha-ha laughter. The yellow-eyed man pulled himself off the sword while they were distracted and jumped at me with one of his arrows. What happened? Gasped Naruto, clutching at the arms, then the back of his seat as he squirmed in excitement. I blew a fireball at him. The Katon Jutsu my father taught me. He said every Uchiha needed to learn at least the fireball jutsu. At this the Hokage let out a guffaw of laughter, a brief bark of mingled surprise and humor. He'd be proud Sasuke, especially in a situation like that. But my apologies, we keep interrupting you. Sasuke felt as if his face would set itself on fire without any chakra input of his own. Oh gods, he was blushing in front of Naruto, he'd be mocked until the end of time. So obviously, he didn't really like that. Indra tried to get me away from him and his eye changed from the normal Sharingan into something else. He looked nervously at Naruto, but Hokage waved at him to continue. As I said, speak freely. Naruto is a part of this too, now. Sasuke took a deep breath. He'd never told anyone else, had never even breathed a word of what happened that night to anyone beyond the Hokage and an Umbu doctor, who didn't really count. He had the Mangekyou Sharingan, I think. It looked different than my brother's, with less red and more black. It looked like this. He began to draw shapes in the air, but the Hokage pushed a pen and a piece of paper towards him. Sasuke idly noted an expense form for 25 sets of gray-plated armor. He drew the design as best he could and pushed it back across the desk. The Hokage nodded, face grave. I will check the S-class records for any examples, though Itachi, damn him, made off with the Uchiha scroll on Sharingan variations. Sharingan variations. Sasuke silently filed that away for later research. So he was trying to save me, pushing me behind him, and when his eye did that, he shouted something about the sun goddess and had a bunch of black flames start burning the yellow-eyed guy too. Black flames. So cool. Naruto was swiftly shut down by the Hokage. This is not a laughing matter, Naruto. The black flames of Amaterasu are a legacy of the Uchiha and the Mangekyou Sharingan since the days of Madara, possibly before. The legends say they are a result of the clan's binding pact with the dragons, but that is likely just myth. Sasuke, what else? The old man, Hagoromo, didn't seem to mind the flames, neither did the yellow-eyed man. He told Indra to redeem the Uchiha clan and do what he wanted, before he made a swirling vortex in the air and dragged the yellow-eyed man in with him. That was the end of the fight part. Naruto sat back in his chair as the exciting part of the story concluded, but Sasuke continued. I asked and Indra said he wasn't with Itachi. He said there were other Uchiha survivors, but they weren't with him. Sasuke counted off on his fingers as Indra had done. Me and him, then Itachi, then one more he was sure of in a place called Akatsuki. No, that's not it, Akatsuki. He said there was one more survivor, but also said that he was dead so he didn't count. Naruto and the Hokage both had raised eyebrows now. Dead and alive are pretty different, Sasuke. You can't be both. Perhaps, murmured the Hokage. He said this last guy had plans to come back, but that it didn't matter right now. He also was surprised to be back in the Uchiha estate, and the Leaf Village. Because I didn't recognize him, I asked why he left. He was older than Itachi, but younger than my parents, if that helps. He said he'd left the village for a bunch of reasons, like hunting a traitor to the clan and village politics. He also said he wanted to get stronger, which is weird because all the Uchiha teachers are dash. He paused. We're in the Leaf Village. He also said something about hatred and said he had a daughter who died. When I asked about her he got really mad, but apologized and said he didn't want to talk about her. He told me to go talk to you when I woke up and if I couldn't talk to you, to find Naruto. He said, Naruto is really good at yelling at the Hokage. Yup, of course I am, grinned Naruto, standing dramatically between his seat and the Hokage's desk. I gotta be if I'm going to be Hokage, you know. The Hokage glared at him and Naruto sheepishly climbed off the desk. Naruto, have you ever heard or seen this man at all before yesterday? Blonde hair moved back and forth. No Jiji, not at all. I don't know how he knows how good I am at yelling. Maybe he heard me. The Hokage didn't answer, staring at his desk. They sat in silence for a few minutes as they all thought about Sasuke's story. Sasuke, in light of this story, I'll be placing an Umbu guard on you. Naruto is already well aware of his Umbu guards, but I beg you both, as the Hokage, as a father, do not try to run away from them. They are and have always been to keep you safe. That is the duty of the Umbu, behind it all. They keep us safe. Naruto and Sasuke stared across the desk. The third Hokage seemed to have aged as they had waited, something heavy settling across his shoulders and bowing his aged head, which now seemed frightfully small and fragile without the Hokage hat. They nodded in agreement, though Naruto was a bit more vocal about it. Now Sasuke, Naruto mentioned something about the Uchiha estate earlier, do you have anything else to ask? Yes, Lord Hokage. What Naruto said is true, I am concerned about what I remember of the Uchiha in October. Just around the period the Kyuubi demolished the village and Naruto was born. 3 separate incidents, but all happened on October 10th. What are we missing? The Hokage turned his glare upon Sasuke, weighing him, evaluating him. He felt the press of powerful chakra all around him and felt Naruto flare and sputter as his own instinctively rose alongside in an instinct. But they were matches against the ocean entire. The third's chakra enveloped them, bowled them over. They couldn't see it, but they could almost smell it, so thick was its potency. Sasuke gagged and nearly threw up the mushrooms he'd had earlier. Then it was gone on one of the summer breezes that wafted through the windows. Both of them sucked in air as their bodies instinctively sought to acclimate to pressure that was not there and had nothing to do with air. Very well. Sasuke, Naruto, I am about to tell you an S-class secret, one you must only reveal in life-threatening circumstances, and only, if there is no other way. I want you to swear on the leaf, you will keep this promise, on the graves of your ancestors. They looked at each other and nodded. Go for it, Jiji. The Hokage took a final long pull on his pipe. Naruto, that your birthday and the Kyuubi attack fall on the same day is no coincidence. Your mother held the beast inside her under a seal, to protect the Leaf Village, and that day, the creature broke free. Your mother Kushina Uzumaki and your father sealed half the beast inside of you to save the leaf and to save you. They died putting themselves between you and the Kyuubi, an act of heroic sacrifice. Naruto's eyes were brimming with tears, but he stayed silent. Your father hoped you would be seen as a hero for containing the Nine Tails, as your mother sometimes was, but hatred against the Jinchuriki runs deep, especially as time passed. Many ninja and citizens of the Hidden Leaf lost their lives that night, and many of the survivors hold it against you. So I really am the Demon Fox, he whispered, but the Hokage shook his head. No. It is sealed inside of you, with one of the last, most powerful seals the Uzumaki ever developed. His voice lightened and some of his old jocularity returned. They were great Funinjutsu masters, the Uzumaki. I only learned a little of the art, and only from my mentor, the second Hokage. The Uzumaki were scattered to the winds shortly after I became Hokage, but they live on in you and in the Hidden Leaf. He tapped his shoulder. We kept the red spiral you see on the shoulders and backs of our ninja to remind ourselves of our old allies, the Uzumaki. They may be gone, but they left us many seals, including those which keep the village safe. They are at our back and shoulders in the most literal way. Your mother, Kushina, was a great ninja, even with the fox inside of her. He chuckled as Naruto's gaze was locked on him, but the boy was drinking in every word, as was Sasuke. They called her the hot-blooded habanero because of her hair and her temper on the battlefield. The mark of the Uzumaki has always been red hair, but in this case, your father's genes overruled hers. Perhaps the only time in his life he won an argument, really. So, if you encounter a ninja with deep red hair, you never know, they might be descended from an Uzumaki. Sasuke spoke up from behind his clasped hands, which helpfully allowed him to bring his jaw back from the floor surreptitiously. But what does this have to do with the Uchiha? You said the leaf failed the Uzumaki, you failed the Uchiha, and Naruto hasn't exactly been doing well either. He ignored both of their protests. The Hokage was saying something about secrecy and the village's enemies, while Naruto was protesting that he was doing just fine, thank you. Sasuke glared at what was he? He'd carried the scroll for him and challenged one of the elders, so technically he was Sasuke's responsibility as an Uchiha. But the Hokage had just finished telling him all about the Uzumaki and the Nine Tails, which, wow. That was a lot. Sasuke thought about their fight and the mushrooms Naruto had offered him that morning, which already seemed like it had happened years ago. What was Naruto Uzumaki? Friend, thought Sasuke. Friend is nice. He tuned back into Naruto berating the third Hokage about better rent, or at least some hot water for his apartment, saying that if he was going to be a walking cage for the demon fox that killed his parents, a little extra cash from the Hokage wasn't too much to ask for. If it was anyone else, Sasuke would have called it extortion, but the third was looking rather miserable. As I said, Lord Third, what does this have to do with the Uchiha? If the Hokage had looked miserable before, he now looked like he was considering just giving Naruto the hat and going back into retirement. Just like, he stopped and drew himself back up and gave them the professor glare. Sasuke felt his confidence melt away like ice cream in the Konoha sun. You both had best watch your tone with me, boys. You may be representing the Uchiha and Uzumaki today, but I am still the Hokage of the Leaf. Remember to whom you are speaking. Sasuke didn't let up. You're avoiding the question. What's one more S-class secret? Why not? We're just handing them out to children today, the third remarked to him, or, perhaps, to himself. Sasuke wasn't sure. Fine. The Mangekyou Sharingan the Uchiha are capable of wielding was one of the few bloodline traits capable of controlling the Nine Tails, as well as the other tailed beasts spread across the continent. Lord Hashirama's wood style was another, as is Hidden Cloud's 12-point lightning binding and the Hidden Sand's scorpion scrolls. The Leaf possessed the mightiest of the tailed beasts, the Kyuubi, with the knowledge that we had both the Senju's wood style and the Uchiha's Sharingan to control it if the Uzumaki seals ever broke. He shuddered. The Kyuubi is a ferocious beast, the most likely to break free and had to be the most tightly bound, with multiple failsafes. It nearly destroyed the village in a few hours until Naruto and Kushina saved us. Imagine how far its rage would spread if it were truly free. They paused, imaging. So dash. Imagine longer. They did. However, the Senju clan has fallen into obscurity and any branch members of that family, if they existed, cannot use the wood style. Thus, when the Kyuubi escaped its bindings, some within the village looked to the Uchiha for protection, while others accused them of treachery. The Uchiha set it free. That meant his clan was responsible for countless deaths, as well as Naruto's own parents. Sasuke felt the burden on his shoulders grow heavier and dreaded the walk back to the compound in that armor, in front of all those villagers. Naruto nudged him in the side and gave him a grin and a thumbs up that weren't anywhere near honest, but credit for trying. The Hokage was speaking again, voice solemn once more. At that time, the Uchiha were the strongest, most populous clan in the Leaf, but they were too aggressive, too quick to temper and prone to rash judgments in battle. I thought to strengthen their role as the police force of Konoha by having them protect the civilians, act as a last line of defense if we should fall. Unfortunately, many in the clan took that as a grave insult to their honor, just as Naruto-kun did this afternoon. They spoke up in vindication of their clan and said they had nothing to do with the Kyuubi, your father especially. He and Counselor Danzo nearly came to blows and only your mother settled the matter. Sasuke tried to imagine the old man he'd seen with a cane, vowing to fight his father. He could believe it, but had no doubt what the outcome would have been. By the time Itachi acted 2 years ago, it was too late. Danzo thought himself vindicated, proof of the black heart of the Uchiha, while we burned your dead and mourned. The Uchiha's history has been trampled and stained, but they, and you, remain proud members of the Leaf. Our ceremony today helped remind everyone of that. The third Hokage smiled. That the Nine Tails Jinchuriki was willing to fight for you, all on his own, has certainly made a statement. I can tell you the council will have a great deal to say to me once we leave this office. At the very least, none of them should confront you about it directly. His eyes hardened even as the smile remained. If they do, the Umbu will let me know. The boys were silent for a while the Hokage smoked his pipe and they thought about the Sharingan, tailed beasts, and dead parents. Both of them opened their mouths, then closed them at different points. Finally, Naruto spoke. So, Does that mean I can't hang around Sasuke anymore? Will people be even more mad at me? He's been super cool and let me carry his super important Uchiha scroll, even when I screwed everything up outside. He even ate my mushrooms. Sasuke wasn't sure if that was a compliment or not, but his heart leapt into his throat. He'd only been around Naruto for a day and already so many things were starting to make sense. He felt like he knew what he was doing when before, he'd been blindly fumbling forward, with the distant promise of killing Itachi as his reward. Now, it wasn't just Itachi and Sasuke and the whole weight of the Uchiha clan. He still needed to find Indra in the hospital and he was sure Naruto was willing to help him too. The Hokage sighed. Officially yes, the boy with the 9 tails running around with the last Uchiha is not a sight that will inspire confidence in certain quarters of the village. The Hyuga, in particular, have their own axes to grind. Unofficially, I realize you both aren't going to listen to me, so I'll just have to listen to people complain and pretend to care. He shook a finger at the blonde. That's what this job really is, Naruto. Listening to people shout in paperwork. If I'm lucky, I take a trip to the capital for budgets and I get to listen to the daimyo talk. He muttered something that sounded like Shisui, then rose to his feet, clasping his hands behind his back. Now, as enjoyable and exhausting as it's been to speak with the future of our village, I'm going to have to kick you out now. Being Hokage is a busy job. They dug in their heels as the professor somehow propelled them towards the door without actually using his hands. Maybe it was the smile. But you didn't even answer all our questions. Yeah. What's the main Gekko Sharingan? Was my mother a Jonin? Who was my dad? Who's Heitake Kakashi? Do I still have to go to school? The boys found themselves outside the Hokage's office, clutching the red armor and the Uchiha scroll without being quite sure how they'd got there. Their questions died on their lips as they saw the counselors and an entire staircase full of Jonin and clan heads stop their conversations in favor of staring at their bright red and behat targets. There was a moment of anticipatory shuffling as dignified and respectable ninja tried to look like they were not jostling in line while actually doing so when everyone broke into a run. Naruto and Sasuke ran screaming down the stairs, making a noise similar to the siren mounted on the police force building, while Inoichi Yamanaka and Shibuya Barame began clambering horizontally over light fixtures to reach the Hokage store before the closer, but much slower counselors. As they ran, Naruto began to laugh as he realized that this might just be the best prank he'd pulled so far and he hadn't used a single drop of paint. Not even Iruka could be mad. Chapter 9, Hound's Story. 7 Umbu Black Ops agents stood in front of the Hokage, who still looked exhausted and had retreated to his pipe once more, though his gaze was as firm as ever. The 7 of you comprise the Uzumaki Protection Detail, known informally as the Fox Squad. Based on the recent developments, including the arrival of this Indra Uchiha, I would like to assign you a secondary duty of surveillance on Sasuke Uchiha. As the two seem to now be fast friends, I believe the task will not add to your schedules or warrant an increase in mission difficulty. However, I would hear your thoughts on this matter first. Speak freely. Mongoose stepped forward, a thin but exceptionally hairy Inuzuka. How long would you expect this assignment to last? Until Indra Uchiha wakes up and we can determine his loyalty to the Leaf. My medical team assures me he will be out for at least a week. If he is not loyal, or proves to be too great a liability, we shall execute him and you will return to your standard assignments. Mongoose nodded as Bat stepped forward. If the two were to split up or attempt to lose us, which would you prefer we prioritize? The Jinchuriki, obviously, though the mere fact would be cause for alarm. I warned them to not make things too difficult for you, and they seemed content. On that matter, there is something I would like to ask. The children came forward in an official capacity as leaders of a clan, and requested answers to numerous questions, some of which trail into S-class. Rather than have them hound me with questions, I will ask one of you to field what questions are appropriate. No need to worry, most were common enough knowledge for any Jonin, so you 7 should have no problems. You may discuss among yourselves. The Hokage sat back and waited patiently as the Umbu huddled and engaged in a quiet, but furious argument. Gradually, the masks all turned towards one ninja in particular, who groaned and stepped forward. Hound reporting for duty as requested, Lord Hokage. Hiruzen lit his pipe to hide the smug grin that spread across his face and breathed deeply of the expensive tobacco. Excellent. Beetle, Squirrel, you have first watched tonight, correct? They nodded. Then there is nothing further to discuss. Hound, I will write up their questions for you by your shift tomorrow morning. Dismissed. The masked ninja bowed as one and filed out into the corridor, where a great many ninja were still waiting impatiently. The Hokage's self-satisfied smile remained for the rest of the afternoon and well into the evening. Once Naruto had gotten the giggles out of his system, they found themselves standing outside the administration building as a faint ruckus could be heard from inside. Sasuke bit back a curse as he realized the Umbu from the ceremony hadn't shown up, so he'd lost a perfectly good sword in his Naruto's Kunao shard now. They probably looked stupid again. With no other option, they began trudging back up Blossom Boulevard, resigned to the long walk back to the Uchiha estate. Civilians and Chunin kept staring at them as they walked, but after talking with the Hokage, some stares didn't seem like the worst thing in the world. Once the crowds had thinned and they were mostly alone, the last Uzumaki turned to the not quite last Uchiha. So, about that super Sherry Nanjiji was talking about. Sasuke tried very hard not to glare and failed. Not today Naruto, okay. Something beyond the glare must have passed to Naruto, because the blonde simply nodded and hefted the scroll slightly higher on his shoulders. Okay. I'm just thinking with all these questions, we should probably make a list. Sasuke held up one hand. Later. Now we're going to go home, drop this stupid, heavy armor back in the armory, put that scroll back, and I'm going to take another shower. One with hot water this time. And off they went, neither noticing the two shapes that stalked them from the rooftops. Trudging back to his house was a familiar feeling for Sasuke, especially on weekends. Without school to take up his day, the not quite last Uchiha found himself training even more vigorously. Running in the late morning, followed by breakfast, followed by combing through the Uchiha library or his father's study, followed by lunch, followed by jutsu training, followed by katas in the dojo, a quick shower and dinner, then sleep. Of all of those, Sasuke hated sleep the most. Even after a year, he still heard the screams, saw the charcoal and chalk genjutsu sketches of his father, brother, cousins, and great-uncles butcher and be butchered in turn. Usually he was too tired to dream. Usually. It was always a flip of the coin, a roll of the dice, whichever gambling metaphor Sasuke felt like using. The point was, even rest felt exhausting. At least it had used to. That first night Naruto had slept in Sasuke's room on a collection of couch cushions and some spare blankets, he hadn't thought much of it. They were both tired and by the time they had replaced the Uchiha artifacts, showered, and had a late lunch, it was too dark for Sasuke to send his friend, walking back to his apartment knowing what the district was like. So Sasuke had insisted he stay the night, even as Naruto had protested that he was fine, really, that he'd always been fine and that Sasuke didn't need to take pity on him. Sasuke had replied that it wasn't pity, but common courtesy and that he still needed time to come up with a punishment for Naruto after his stunt with the Kunao had nearly gotten them both declared missing nin. Naruto had scoffed that Sasuke had been overreacting and Sasuke was forced to break out the scroll again to explain to the last Uzumaki the seriousness of Konoha clan politics. By that point, it was too late for them to go home anyway. Neither of them noticed that the lamp in the corner had seemingly lit itself, or the way the trees in the back garden seemed to rustle slightly less in the wind. That night Sasuke had no nightmares of his brother. Behind a cage of golden bars and seals, the Kyuubi bared his teeth in grotesque parody of a smile. He had been grievously wounded by the fourth, torn in half and starved of half of his chakra, his very essence. His yin energy had disappeared alongside that damned human into the stomach of the Reaper God and he had slumbered for years to stave off the agony. But yesterday, when Naruto's rage began to drip down from cracks in the ceiling, as he and Sasuke rolled across the floor of a shabby apartment, then stood in the blazing Konoha sun to answer a dire insult, the Kyuubi licked its lips. The boy's negative energy, the sin and wickedness of humanity the sage himself had charged Kurama with eradicating and devouring, was soaking down through the very walls of his prison. Kurama couldn't get out, could not touch the mortal world with a single claw or wisp of fur, but he had been made to feed on hatred and darkness. And the Uchiha estate of his most hated foe fairly dripped with it. And dreams, as far as the Kyuubi was concerned, bad dreams were perfectly fair game to devour, if he couldn't have the Uchiha they spawned from. The next morning, when Sasuke and Naruto were arguing over what counted as a good breakfast, they were surprised by a knock at the door. Sasuke in particular was surprised, for there were still wards around the estate that meant only the Uchiha bloodline would be able to pass through. They opened the door to find a masked Umbu with the face of a hound and grey hair, hands in his pockets. Yo! They both stared. Umbu were supposed to be silent killers. Certainly all of Naruto's Umbu-sans had been. They certainly didn't say yo. The man pulled 2 rectangular boxes from his pockets, wrapped in grey cloth, and offered both to the children. He was fighting to be formal, but they could hear the cheer behind the words. Hokage-sama apologizes for not returning your weapons to you, especially after Uzumaki-san was trusting enough to offer the first exchange. To his credit, Naruto did look sheepish. Wish that in mind, the Hokage has ordered me to act as a temporary guard to you both until this current matter has been resolved. You mean with Indra Uchiha? Where is he anyway? The man did not reply, so Sasuke tried a different track. What are you allowed to tell us? I am unable to directly divulge any information of S rank or above. The Hokage has permitted this operative to answer certain B-class questions with personal discretion, though A-class questions are to be submitted to the council in writing. S-class questions will be ignored. Sasuke poked Naruto in the side, eyes shining with excitement. So he's allowed to tell us some things. What's your name? Naruto asked. Sasuke felt like an idiot for not thinking of it. He'd assumed Umbu didn't have names. That was the whole point of the masks, right? The Umbu relaxed fractionally and tapped his mask. I am known as Hound. Naruto frowned for a moment, then brightened once again. I recognize you. You were one of my Umbu-sans, the one who ran away with me when the Uchiha fell out of the sky. I did not run away with you, Naruto. I relocated my charge to a safe location, then doubled back to secure any intelligence. There is a difference. Still feeling foolish, Sasuke realized they were still standing in the doorway and slid the door open further. You can come in if you want, Hound-san. The man bent and began undoing his sandals. Just Hound, please. I needed to secure this area anyway. Why? Asked Naruto, drawing out the Kunao fragment. Does Jiji think something might happen to us? Hound made a derogatory grunt. The Hokage does not reveal all his thoughts to his Umbu. We are instruments of his will to protect and defend the village. He is simply being careful. Additionally, he has likely sent me to answer questions so that you will not bother him like this again. He wishes me to remind you to, please just make an appointment next time. They moved slowly through the house as Hound carefully inspected the black stains on the floor and ceiling. The Umbu sniffed once, then ran outside to vomit into the grass. Naruto and Sasuke shrugged and helped him carve the offending areas out of the wood. Hound continued his search of the house, but paused at Ataka's room, which was still closed, and a thick film of dust covered the door. The wiry thin Umbu looked down at Sasuke. I'll need to enter this room to complete surveillance operations. Do I have permission? What happens if I say no? Then I'll make note of it in my report to Lord Hokage, and you will have the wonderful responsibility of justifying an obvious hole in our defenses through pages and pages of paperwork, while I shall have to remain paranoid and jumpy every time I move by this door. Fine. But I'm staying out here. Hound nodded and Naruto squeezed Sasuke's hand in reassurance. Despite themselves, all three sneezed when they opened the door. The dust was perhaps a quarter-inch thick across every surface. The room was Spartan, with no wall scrolls or misplaced books. The bed had been neatly made and set against the wall next to a desk and chair which were lit by a single window, just the right size for someone to sneak in or out of. They were silent as they examined the room. Naruto was slightly disappointed. It didn't look like the bedroom of someone who'd slaughtered his clan. He'd expected writing on the walls or a bunch of weapons. He went to step forward, but Hound shoved him back. Stop, he bent down, one arm still holding Naruto back, who had frozen with his foot in the air. Hound reached down and pointed, revealing a thin cord stretched across the hardwood and nearly invisible even when Sasuke was looking straight at it. Naruto gulped and lowered his foot back down. Booby traps. Obviously. No idea how Umbu missed this earlier. Someone's going to get raked over the coals for this. And look, Hound traced the line back behind the door hinge, then up underneath the bed. It's unbroken. Somehow 2 successive Umbu teams missed this and didn't set it off. Hound avoided saying the last part of his thought out loud. Or Ataka could have come back afterwards, without the Umbu noticing. He quietly resolved to double-check the barriers surrounding the Uchiha compound. So, what are you going to do about this, Hound-san? The gray-haired ninja gestured for them to move back down the corridor as he drew a sword from the sheath on his back. I'm going to carefully trip it. All 3 held their breath as the blade silently parted the string. Nothing. No explosion, flying shuriken, nothing. Hound sniffed the air experimentally. No poison gas and, he pulsed his chakra, no genjutsu either. Naruto perked up. You can put genjutsu into a trap. Rarely. It's very difficult, but Ataka was a master of genjutsu. If anyone knew how, he would have learned. The boys remained in the corner as Hound entered the room, blade drawn. Sasuke was sure if Hound tried, he could have cut the tension in the room with that blade. Did you ever meet my brother? Silence from the room. Hound. The voice returned to the formal, rote quality it had when Sasuke was asking the right questions. I knew Ataka Uchiha in Umbu Unit Rho. Mask designation, Weasel. Sent on 253 missions, all marked above S-class in the wake of his actions. Subject has been designated a missing nin, to be killed on sight. Bounties commensurate with his threat level have been placed with the other great nations in addition to Waterfall, Hot Springs, Grass, and Tea Country. Sasuke and Naruto digested that silently as Hound began opening drawers. So Sasuke, if your brothers wanted pretty much everywhere, what would happen if someone else killed him? Or if he just dropped dead tomorrow? Would your clan be avenged that way too? Sasuke leaned his head back and looked at the ceiling. Not really, Naruto. Could we not talk about him right now? They say the best revenge is living well, piped up Hound. I don't think Umbu Black Ops should be giving that advice. Now, whatever happened to respecting your elders? I'll let you know when I find elders to respect, Hound. Aren't you two a bunch of cheeky brats? Really now? Find anything, Hound-san. Spare pens, a pile of ash in the top drawer, an old shuriken. Are you done yet? I thought this would be more interesting, you know. Now, I'll be done when I walk out of the room, or it explodes. Until then, just sit out there and ask me questions. Naruto mentally counted off questions on his fingers, skipping anything related to the Uchiha. Hound-san, do you know anything about a guy called Hatake Kakashi? There was a harsh crunch from inside the room, followed by muffled groaning. The boys rushed to the door to see Hound's legs sticking out from underneath the bed, next to his mask and what looked like a toolkit. Hound-san. Sasuke took a step forward, then remembered the invisible wire. I'm alive. Hound's hand flapped weakly but he stayed where he was. Now, Naruto, you really have a knack for asking questions, don't you? No wonder Danzo hates you so much. Naruto stuck out his tongue and pouted, a sight which oddly cheered Sasuke up slightly. Counselor Turniphead can go suck on an egg. He was rude to Sasuke and he thinks I'm the Ninetales, when I'm not. I'm Naruto Uzumaki, and cause I'm going to be Hokage, he'd better get used to it. A chuckle emanated from under the bed, followed by heavy coughing. Hound groped around blindly until he found the screwdriver and brought it under to presumably continue taking the bed apart. You certainly are Kushina's son, Naruto. She was in the Umbu too, a bit before my time. And I'm glad, because she probably would have beaten me to within an inch of my life if I had been. Naruto's face creased in worry. Why's that? She doesn't sound very nice at all. I've given you the wrong idea, sorry. Just that when she was in Umbu, I would have only been your age, just after the start of the Third Shinobi World War. She was fiercely opposed to having any genin teams join the war at all and lobbied fiercely with the Hokage to prohibit the idea. Of course, the war didn't allow us that luxury and whole classes of genin were graduated and sent out on missions as soon as the projected survival rate of the class went above 50%. The clinical manner hound had lapsed back into made both boys look at his legs with concern. They were only 9 and to them, genin graduation was as far away as the moon. The idea that the Leaf had been that desperate at the beginning of the war, it was disconcerting. Of course, when Kushina got angry, like you Naruto, that made it harder for her to keep the Kyuubi chained up, because he thrives on negative emotions. So rather than laze around behind the front lines to be a strategic warning to Sand and Stone, watching children march by, she marched up to the Hokage's office and shouted at him for 2 hours straight until he agreed to let her join the Umbu. Like I said, a lot like you, Naruto. That's why the village called her the hot-blooded habanero, because of her temper and her red hair. Step back, I'm sending part of the bed frame your way, just drag it into the hall. A long wooden beam poked out from underneath the bed and the boys maneuvered it into the hall with some difficulty. Naruto had slammed his end into the walls twice and left some black marks that Sasuke knew would take forever to scrub out. They trundled back in to continue Hound's story. So what you need to understand about ninja is that Umbu isn't only a super-secret Black Ops group. That's most of what it does, but it's also sort of a testing ground and a who's who of the village's top jonin. Most of the ninja who become jonin do some time in the Umbu Black Ops, though what they do and for how long depends on their skill set, the state of the 5 great nations, and if the ninja is willing to stay. Once we're accepted, we stay for 6-month terms in peacetime, longer if there's a war. After each term, we get an option to stay in or to leave, no hard feelings either way. It's more dangerous if a ninja doesn't want to be there and loses focus. What I mean is, because it's the toughest place to be a ninja, anyone who wants to become Hokage since the second established the Umbu has spent at least 1 term under a mask. Hound's clay mask stared up at them with blank eye holes, its curled mouth suggesting some private joke. Naruto stared back at the mask, warring feelings flashing across his face. So the only way I can be Hokage is if I join the Umbu someday. Not necessarily, you could buck the trend. The position of Hokage is also influenced by the daimyo of the Fire Nation, the Jonin commander, the existing counselors, and the clan heads. Because it's a position with a lot of power, and because the Hokage acts as the face of the village, it's also important that they are well known and liked by many people. Working in Umbu means the civilians don't see you, but it helps give a greater understanding of the shinobi world. There was a ripping noise as Hound tore open the bottom of the mattress. Being Hokage means different things to different people. The third Hokage thinks it means being the head of one big Leaf Village family, helping settle differences and family squabbles, while Lord Second thought the Hokage's duty was to strengthen the structures and governance of the village, not just its military. Kushina thought that as Hokage, she could use that position to right the wrongs she saw within Konoha's shinobi system, like those young genin, or the villagers' hatred of the Jinchuriki. Those sound like great reasons for my mom to be Hokage. How come she wasn't chosen? Was it cause she was a Jinchuriki like me? Underneath the bed, Hound weighed his words. He would have to be very careful. A little bit, yes, he admitted. Some of the civilians, who'd only heard the legends of the Kyuubi and hadn't seen Kushina fight, were worried about her as Hokage just on principle, bunch of idiots. Some of the more cautious members of the village felt that Kushina would change too much too fast and upset the balances of power the third Hokage had maintained in the village. Most of the Jonin and Umbu who had fought with Kushina in the war were all for it. Some of them had been chomping at the bit for things to change. Unfortunately, some of those people talked about their ideas for change a little too much and in the wrong places. Word of this made its way back to the daimyo of the Land of Fire who didn't like women at all. He made it clear that he would only accept a male candidate for Hokage, which almost set off the rebellion he was afraid of in the first place. Another chuckle came from under the bed. Sasuke, your mother, Mikoto, was best friends with Kushina and they both were nearly ready to charge over to the capital to have words with the daimyo who had been favoring Orochimaru of the legendary son in for the post. But the third wouldn't approve of Orochimaru, even though he'd been the third student, and the daimyo wouldn't approve of Kushina, while the civilians just wanted a new Hokage. Lord Third had wanted to retire for a while and the Leaf needed a new face once the war ended. So there was a whole lot of politics and compromise involved and the fourth Hokage, Minato Namikaze, was accepted. Like Kushina, he'd made a name for himself in the war as the Yellow Flash of Konoha and they'd fought together across the entire northern front, because she was the only one who could keep up with him. Because they were close, people thought Kushina's ideas could have their day while the Damao and the reluctant members of the village kept their restraining influence and tradition junk for a few more years. Only Orochimaru wasn't happy, and he ended up becoming a missing nin himself. Naruto had his arms crossed, face scrunched up in thought. So what did the fourth do? Did he listen to my mom? What did he want to do as Hokage? Well, he was a very busy man for the first year of his government, adding new counselors and helping manage the drawdown from the Third Great Shinobi War. Cloud still refused to sign a peace treaty, though they had also drawn down their own forces from the northern border. Minato-sen, excuse me, the fourth Hokage, made appearances there to remind our ninja and Clouds that he had not forgotten about them. Sounds tense, piped up Sasuke. It was, but not as much as you'd think. Both sides had dug in, and with all the losses, it was obvious no one's hearts were in it enough to strike out in force. Cloud also had its own internal politics to deal with and needed to reseal one of their Jinchuriki. Naruto perked up again at the mention of others like him. Do you know anything more about that? Hound considered. Sorry, that probably falls under more S-class information. I shouldn't have mentioned it. Dang, I want to know more about what other people like me are doing, or if we could write letters. Naruto, warned Sasuke, they're enemy ninja too, don't forget. Well, from what Hound Sensei and Jiji said, it sounds like my mom and I weren't treated very well, even when we protect the village. Sasuke had nothing to say about that as his companion turned back to Hound. Well, keep going with your story. I want to know what happened with my mom and the fourth Hokage, what they did to change the village. Oh boy, thought Hound. Here it comes. Well, Kushina had you. There was silence as the statement permeated the room. Well, I know I'm pretty great, but how did that change the village? Was it something to do with the Kyuubi? Sasuke looked over sharply. Naruto's fake smile was plastered back over his face as he asked the question, even though Hound couldn't see it, but he was beginning to tap his fingers together the way he did when he didn't know a question in class or when other kids refused to sit with him at lunch. They all knew he had arrived at the most important question. There was silence from under the bed for a very long time, and the longer it stretched, the more Naruto's mask cracked. By the 1-minute mark, the smile was gone. By a minute 30 his eyes had welled up and he turned away. As Hound finally slid out from under the bed, Sasuke didn't even bother to sneak a peek at his face, which was covered in another, dark blue mask. The Umbu levered himself up in a crouch, gaze fixated on Naruto's back just as Sasuke's was. The boy's breath had begun to hitch and he clearly was trying his hardest to not cry. Sasuke backed away towards the entrance, but something stopped him. This was a very personal moment, but he'd bared his own soul to Naruto the night before. Surely, he needed to stay if Naruto wanted him to. And the boy hadn't said anything at all. Naruto. Hound's voice floated there in the silence, no longer devoid of emotion or showing a distant cheer as he'd discussed Mikoto and Kushina's lives. It was weighted, heavy, and trembling with emotion long suppressed. Naruto, please look at me. He shook his head, so Kakashi lifted a hand towards the orange jacket, hesitated, then placed it gently on Naruto's shoulder. The blonde tensed, but Hound made no move to turn him at all or tighten his grip. Naruto, none of this is your fault. Absolutely none of it. It's mine. Hound's sentences were short as the man forced them out from behind the mask, a dam of emotion finally cracking. It's my fault Kushina died, that I couldn't to save her. The fourth Hokage had asked me, friend killer Kakashi, to keep her safe, and I failed at that too. Naruto whirled around and struck Kakashi full in the face, an open-handed slap that even Sasuke winced at as Hound's head snapped to the side. So it's your fault my mom and dad are dead? That I have to have this thing inside me? Why? Why? Why did this happen? Naruto's cry was just as raw as Hound's confession, just as pained. They were both crying now as Sasuke stood frozen, knowing he had to stay, even as he questioned what Hound had said. Friend killer Kakashi? As in hey, take Kakashi on the scroll. So then. It was the Kyuubi's fault. As she had you, the seals on the Nine Tails weakened, and something happened, the creature broke free. I knew she had left the village to have you, just in case something would happen, but I should have been there, could have done something to stop . They said the Kyuubi was taller than our buildings, almost as tall as the Hokage mountain, said Sasuke. He felt like someone else was saying the words, as if his textbook or perhaps Iruka-sensei was spilling out of his own mouth in response to the scene. That only Lord Third, Lord Fourth, and the clan heads could even move it. I don't think you dash. You weren't even there, spat Hound. What do you know? Naruto slapped Hound again, this time with a backhand, which refocused the Umbu's attention on the child in front of him. Don't talk to him like that. He's my friend. Kakashi dropped his hand, which had still been hanging limply in the air, and went into a bow of contrition so deep his head touched the floor. Sasuke remembered Itachi in the street outside, face down on the cobbled streets as his father and 3 other Uchiha glared at him. I am deeply sorry and apologize for my rash actions, Uzumaki-sama. What else? Naruto's voice had gone from teary and angry to the voice he'd used against Danzo the day before. Hard, sharp, tempered anger, with that same unidentifiable pitch. Dangerous anger. Sasuke remembered the gaze of hatred Itachi had sent after his father once his back had turned and stiffened in anticipation of another attack from Naruto. But there was nothing. The boy grabbed the shoulders of Hound's armor and dragged him upright. What else happened? What did you do to my mom? Hound's voice had quieted. Where before he sounded like a man whose heart was breaking, now he sounded like it had been buried in a ditch many years earlier. Back to the cold clinical Umbu operative, though the tears continued to stream down his face. Lord Third had ordered myself and many of the village jonin to act as a cordon between the beast and the rest of the village to limit civilian casualties and save who we could. The Uchiha had been posted behind the line and behind Hokage Mountain as a last-ditch defense against the Kyuubi's rage. But the Nine Tails went through us like we were nothing. Buildings, crushed, trees used as clubs. Only Lord Fourth and Kushina's jutsu prevented the destruction of the leaf. What did they do? The reason your mother had been chosen as the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails is because of her clan. The Uzumaki were powerful seal masters, but only the women of the clan could summon forth their bloodline technique, the chakra chains, their will formed upon the world itself. With them Kushina brought the Kyuubi down, dragged it outside the village with Lord Third and Fourth, who performed a sealing jutsu with the intent to kill the beast alongside himself. However, he knew the village needed a Jinchuriki to be safe, so he stored half the Kyuubi's chakra inside the nearest living soul he could find, the newborn Uzumaki Naruto. So he just used me? Because I was there. I don't know, admitted Hound. Minato never did anything without a reason. He must have hoped you could contain or use its power just as Kushina did, or maybe he really was just desperate. Well, he was a horrible Hokage then, declared Naruto, arms crossed, and some of the deeper anger beginning to drain away from him. He should have just died with the Kyuubi like he meant to, and my mom and I could be here now, instead of you. He shoved at Hound, but because they were both already on the floor, it didn't do much. Kakashi's hand came up, but Naruto slapped it away. They both died to protect you, Naruto. Lord Fourth and Kushina. The Nine Tails did not want to be sealed again and sought to kill its only viable host. They both jumped into the path of its claw to protect you, knowing they would die, because they wanted you to live. They died heroes, protecting the village. Well, their deaths didn't help at all, did they? I still have the Kyuubi inside me and they don't have to deal with this. Naruto's mouth quivered again. I want my mom. I don't want her to be a hero. I don't want her to be dead. He collapsed into Hound's chest, clinging to him even as his fist pounded against the Umbu's shoulder. I want my Muum. I don't want to be alive, if it means I have to deal with this. I don't deserve to be Hokage if I can't even get the clone jutsu right, if because I have the Kyuubi it means no one likes me, if I screw up Sasuke's big meeting when he was nice to me. He sniffed. I don't think I'm a good person. Sasuke cleared his throat. Not only was this starting to sound like his own thoughts in the dark of night, alone in the Uchiha estate, he had to speak up. That's not true. He repeated it. That's not true, Naruto. You got angry at Danzo, but I was angry too, and you stopped me from doing something, which could have been worse. You gave me your mushrooms and believed me about Indra Uchiha, and helped me through your window when I was going to fall. You want to be Hokage, right? I think, he said slowly, realizing the words were true as he said it. I think you are a good person, or you're trying hard to be. My brother's a bad person, he never cried. Because you're crying now, because you miss your mom, because I miss my mom, I think that makes us good people. Hound sent Sasuke a look of relief and gratefulness over his shoulder as he tentatively patted Naruto's head. You forget, Naruto, that I was or am your Umbu-san. I've watched you for years now, even when you were painting the Hokage monuments or hiding glitter bombs all around the Umbu headquarters. You're Kushina's son. You have her fire, her rebel spirit, but you're not a bad person. You're a kid. Kids do naughty stuff sometimes, but that's okay. The Kyuubi doesn't make you a bad person and, he added, a Sharingan doesn't make you a bad person. He turned, with Naruto still clutching to his torso like a limpet, and Sasuke saw that his left eye had the same red glow of his clansman, the curved tomo of an active Sharingan. My comrade who gave me this Sharingan wasn't a bad person and he made me promise to use it to keep my comrades safe, to protect the leaf. I think the fourth and your mother wanted the same for you. The clone jutsu doesn't matter, Naruto. If you want to become Hokage, like Kushina did, if you want to help Sasuke, whatever you want to do, then I think you'll make a splendid ninja. Naruto looked up at him and sucked some snot back into his nose. Hound-san, why do you think I can do that, when I hit you? Hound's smile was visible even through his mask as his eye crinkled in sync. Because you're Naruto Uzumaki, right? Naruto nodded hesitantly at first, then as the thought took root, a real smile, shaky though it was, began to bloom on his own face. Yeah, I guess you're right, Hound-san. My mom got really close to being Hokage, except for some stupid old Damao, and dumb OL4th gave me the Kyuubi, so I'm gonna have to do something about him too. I'm gonna show that Damao, Danzo, and everybody else that Naruto Uzumaki's gonna be Hokage. I'm gonna be such a good Hokage they won't even remember the Kyuubis in me, I'll be so good. You'll see, Hound-san. He poked Hound in the nose, who blinked in surprise, then swung Naruto up on his shoulders, laughing and practically dancing out of the room as Naruto ducked the doorway, cheering along. Sasuke felt a small Uchiha smile break across his own face and followed them down the hall and through the living room, then out onto the street, mimicking Naruto's proclamations the day earlier. Make way for Lord Naruto Uzumaki, the fifth Hokage. Make way, make way. On top of Hound, Naruto was waving, cheering, and blowing raspberries at an imaginary crowd in equal measure as a figure dropped down in front of them. Another masked Umbu, this time with long purple hair and her own sword drawn. Hound, I heard shouting, Wadash. Kat-san, Kat-san, crowed Naruto, when I become Hokage, will you be in my guard like Hound-san? I'd put Sasuke in it too, but he's got to be the head of the Uchiha, so he'd be too tired. I would not, butted in Sasuke. I could do all sorts of things and be on your council too. But you have to drag that heavy scroll everywhere as clan head and that would be super tiring, even for a strong ninja like you. I don't have to carry that scroll everywhere, idiot, I told you that was just for the ceremony. We've had a lot to think about, you rich bastard, can't you cut me a break? You'll have a lot to think about when you're Hokage, I'm not cutting you any breaks, got it? Especially not when I'm Lord Uchiha. As the boys continued bickering, Kat shot Hound a questioning look, who gave her a thumbs up. Deep down, he felt himself lighten, just a bit. He'd told Naruto the truth and the boy had every right to be angry. But he was also up there on Hound's shoulders, chattering away with Sasuke about his Hokage celebration. He doubted Minato or Kushina would be pleased with how long it had been, but he'd finally started to take care of their son. He hadn't failed them completely, not yet. He was Umbu and thus too cynical to ever voice it aloud, but a part of him, a part that sounded a lot like Obito, quietly told him that things were looking up from here. Get it, Bakakashi? Because you've got my eye, and so Sunday shone on. Kat ended up cooking lunch, Itake's bedroom forgotten. Chapter 10, Cats and Dogs. They'd played Rochambeau for the dishes like civilized Umbu and Kakashi lost. So he was up to his elbows in suds while Sasuke and Naruto pattered around the kitchen and dining room burning off energy and pretending to be great heroes. Somehow, they were both wearing plates of red Uchiha armor, though at least Sasuke's were on right side up. Kat had continued to dismantle Itake's bed, more out of a need to continue to spite the traitor, as Kakashi had, than any security need at this point. The 12 explosive tags he'd found and defused were a concern, but he knew the veteran Umbu had it well in hand. Why would Ataka place a trap to blow up his bed anyway? One more mystery from the mind of a madman. As he scrubbed away at a particularly stubborn sauce stain on one of the plates, Kakashi felt some of the tension go out of his shoulders. Maybe it was because he wasn't wearing his mask and some of his armor, but this had rapidly become less of a standard Guardian mission and more. He wasn't sure what it was turning into, but felt equally sure the third Hokage had planned for it considering their last discussion. He also wasn't as upset about it as he expected it to be. Hound-san. Should we, still call you Hound-san? I mean, the Uchiha cast about. I've figured out your name, but you're still an Umbu, so. He trailed off, looking at the hound mask that Cat had placed on the counter, perhaps to emphasize that exact point. Hound, once again Hatake Kakashi, shrugged. We'll see. I'll have to speak to Lord Third, but you can still call me Kakashi as long as we're in the house. It was pretty obvious, wasn't it? Sasuke nodded solemnly and Kakashi was vividly reminded of Fugaku's own expressions during council sessions. It's been a busy couple of days, Kakashi-san. Sensei? Which works. Now, I'm not your sensei yet, deflected Kakashi as he passed the last plate into the drying rack. I was assigned to answer questions and guard you, but I don't think I'm allowed to teach you jutsu. He tapped his still sudsy hand to the dishcloth he'd wrapped around his head. Especially any jutsu involving the Sharingan. Lord Danzo made that very specific. Well, can we do any physical training then? I've dusted the dojo and use it a bunch on the weekends. Even knowing Sasuke's use of the dojo was likely to practice ways to kill a certain someone, Kakashi was heartened that Mikato's precious dojo hadn't gone to waste. And Naruto was still running circles around the couch, so yes, maybe some more vigorous exercise would be good for them. That does sound like a good idea, Sasuke. Draining the sink and toweling his hands dry, Kakashi called for Naruto and the three began to make their way down the hallway as the Umbu was interrogating the boys on what they had learned in the academy so far. Well, Sasuke's really great at shuriken and taijutsu when we train in the yard, but dash. You mean when I kick your butt in the training yard, reminded Sasuke, a smug smile on his face. Yeah, I get it, grumbled Naruto. Anyway, Iruka-sensei said I've gotten really good at using kunao, but says I need to work on my shuriken accuracy a lot. Well, it's a good start. But are there any weapons you'd like to learn how to use? Both boys' eyes lit up and Kakashi knew he'd made a mistake. A sword. An axe. A scythe. A meteor hammer. A chain scythe. A glaive. Now, placated Kakashi, let's not get our hopes up. I'm just one measly Umbu operative, I don't know everything about weapons. The boys gave him a flat look. Jiji sent you to us because you know everything, so yes you do. Naruto folded his arms while Kakashi tried to think of a solution. How about we start with one? Which one do you really want to use, if you had to pick? They thought. I'd like to use a sword. Sasuke's certainty made Kakashi nod. After growing up around the police force, a sword was a symbol of an officer and the tanto sheathed in the small of the Umbu's back just added weight to the choice. Inside his own head, Sasuke was imagining killing Itachi with his own sword, the final statement of his vengeance for the Uchiha clan. His dreamy smile was disrupted when Naruto poked him. Hey, quit daydreaming. Naruto. Kakashi-sensei, I'd like to use a kanabo, one of those big iron clubs you know. Naruto gestured with his hands to indicate the size he wanted. Something big and intimidating I could use to stomp the floor at council meetings, you know. You don't bring weapons to council meetings, muttered Sasuke. Kakashi piped up. Well Sasuke, maybe you want to talk to Kat-san here. The woman in question was coming out of Itachi's room, arms piled high with blocks of wood from the now thoroughly dismantled bed. Kakashi winked at her, though the effect was somewhat spoiled by his dish rag. Her boyfriend has mastered the dance of the crescent moon technique and she taught it to him. Though her mask was back on, Sasuke could feel the kunoichi studying him. Maybe. Depends if this really is a long-term gig or not, Hound-san. I think it is, Kat-san. Don't hold it against them. She tossed her violet hair over her shoulder in irritation. I'm not, just evaluating if that brat's going to run off and get himself killed the moment I finish teaching him. That's what you want it for, right? To go after your brother. Sasuke nodded, his face serious. It's my responsibility, my mission. It's what I'm supposed to do, by all the laws. My clan demands vengeance. Kat sighed. You sure about this hound? He's one dramatic little brat. Kakashi met her eyes through the porcelain mask. It's a complicated technique, it'll be many years before he masters it, even with the Sharingan. Who knows what will happen? Fine. She pulled a kunai from her belt and handed it to Sasuke. Take this, go outside, and come back to the dojo with 20 branches from those trees along the edge of the river. I'll be following you, but you'll have to pick the branches on your own. When you're done, bring them back to the dojo and we'll start. Sasuke nodded, uncertain what this had to do with swords, but set off, with Kat in his wake. Kakashi turned back to Naruto, who had surprisingly been quiet as he wiggled in place. Probably the prospect of weapons training was sufficient motivation. So, you want something heavy and imposing, but also useful on the battlefield as well as a symbol. Naruto nodded so fast his head was a blur. I can work with that. I'm not formally trained in staff fighting, but I've seen enough to get you started and we can find a more formal teacher for that later. Naruto looked worried. But you're not going away, right? I've still got Iruka-sensei, Mitsuki-sensei, and Jiji who all have to teach me stuff to become Hokage, you know. Kakashi ruffled his hair in response and Naruto beamed like someone had promoted him to Jonin. Of course not, I'm staying here and you'll probably drive me crazy just like your other teachers. They opened the sliding door to the dojo and Naruto's eyes widened in awe. The room was huge, twice as big as his entire apartment, with firm mats on the floors and a massive weapons rack that covered the left wall, while wall scrolls depicting stylized Uchiha engaged in combat decorated the right. A massive Uchiha fan dominated the far wall, emphasizing whose blood normally spilled in this space, all in pursuit of perfection. They meandered over to the weapons rack and Kakashi picked up a wooden bow staff, weighing it in his hands, then, with a sharp jerk of his knee, broke it in two. Hey, what did you do that for? You need to start with something smaller, more suited to your size. I'll be adding weights to this once you get the initial forms down, so you can gain muscle mass as we train. Naruto looked at his thin, under-muscled forearms and frowned. That might be tough, Kakashi-sensei. Maybe we should pick something different. Oh, how come? You clearly wanted this, why change now? Naruto looked away and brought his hands together in front of him. It was a nervous tic, Kakashi noted. One he would break him of shortly. On the other hand, every ninja who advanced to the rank of Jonin had developed a quirk of some sort or another and Naruto had been through enough already. Naruto's gaze was still down at the floor, so Kakashi gently raised it with the smooth end of the staff. Naruto, be honest. He chided. It's just, I'm always hungry, even when I eat a bunch, and Iruka-sensei only takes me to Ichiraku Ramen so many times. And Jiji's money always seems to run out, so I eat those mushrooms down by the Naka River, but those aren't really good, I know. Kakashi blinked in surprise as he considered the statement. He'd seen the boy foraging for mushrooms, but hadn't realized. You'll have enough food to build muscle mass, Naruto. He said firmly, feeling an ember of anger stir in his gut at the village, at himself, who had been blinded by his grief, and at the Hokage for, well, everything. I promise. The staff disappeared from his hand as Naruto began swinging it around enthusiastically, continuing his glorious conquest from the kitchen. Thanks a bunch, Kakashi-sensei. Oh boy, this is gonna be great. I'll have mastered my first technique by the time Sasuke comes back with all his branches. Beneath his mask, Kakashi smirked. He was dearly going to enjoy this part. Consider it karmic justice for Minato's grueling training regime, which had been just as hard on him as Obito and Rin, even as he had insisted, he didn't need it, that his father had trained him well enough. Maybe this is the true bond of master and student, he idly mused as he swiped the stick back and began instructing Naruto on the proper stances of staff usage through ample pokes and prods. The bond of hideous training passed down through sweat and hard knocks. Sasuke's first 2 sticks were grueling affairs as he alternatively sought and hacked away at the tough bark of the branches in the backyard, for the smooth lines of a kunai were not suited to woodwork. Sweaty, but determined, he handed the knife back to Cat. "I'm not giving up," he said shortly and retraced his steps across the backyard and then out of the house grounds entirely as Cat followed, wondering silently what he planned to do. Sasuke found a groundskeeper's tool shed 1 street over, discreetly tucked between 2 tall oaks and all but invisible from the road. Cat recognized the space, if Sasuke did not. It was where she had found Shibaki Uchiha, age 16, with 3 shuriken embedded in his back. Though she glanced down at the spot, now indistinguishable from any other in the grass, Sasuke fiddled with the lock then glanced sheepishly back at Cat. "Sorry, Cat? I don't have a key for this place. Could you?" he trailed off, but she understood. Nodding, she knelt at the lock and produced a thin metallic object with various small points sticking out of the sides on wheels. The whole thing looked scratched and worn, like it had been used many times. "You'll learn to pick locks in the academy soon," she remarked, "but for now, this will suffice. Just don't make a habit of expecting us to break into places for you. Technically, I own this, so it's not breaking in. You're just saving us both some time instead of wandering around as I look for the key." A few minutes of clicking and sharp twists of her wrist produced the required clunk and Sasuke scampered inside as soon as she opened the door. He came back out bearing 2 hand axes, blades slightly rusted along the sides, but still well honed along their edges. Cat narrowed her eyes behind her mask and debated if this would be considered cheating. She'd intended to make a point about patience, forcing Sasuke to use the unwieldy, improper kunai to cut down the branches while she would be able to work out how the hell she could or even should teach the last Uchiha the initial concepts of the crescent moon style, which relied on misdirection, illusion, and speed. Now she had to think on her feet, but Cat was used to doing that as a part of Umbu. She just hoped she and Hayate wouldn't get in trouble for this down the line. They returned to the backyard and inside Sasuke could hear intermittent whoosh noises and the clack of wood impacting wood. Placing one of the axes to the side, Sasuke ascended the tree and made short work of the next 18 required branches, which soon piled up below Cat's own tree branch. He looked over at her, sweaty, but pleased. "Cat-sensei, I've finished. You wanted to teach me the importance of the proper tool, in combat, correct? I've heard how many variations on the sword exist in Konoha, so I figured you had something specific in mind." "Yes," thought Cat, "bluff thoroughly until you can talk with Hayate." She nodded and dropped to the ground as Sasuke flung the axe a good distance from the tree and clambered down on his own. She noticed that it had landed blade first in the opposite wooden fence, and had sunk deep. The crescent moon style can be adopted to any length or style of blade once you learn the fundamentals, but we can use my Umbu short sword as an example for now. "I understand you carried one yesterday, what did you think of it?" Sasuke glanced over his bundle of branches but the Umbu betrayed no sign that the question was anything beyond what it was. "Calm down, Sasuke," he told himself. "She's training you like Kakashi asked, not setting you up for politics." He released a breath and decided to answer honestly. "Unfamiliar, Cat-sensei. I kept worrying it would slip out of my belt or that it sat on my hip incorrectly." "Is that why yours is stationary on your back?" "Yes. Umbu have to move quickly and the minimum of noise. Your manner yesterday was mostly ceremonial and would have had your sword attached more permanently than through a belt sash during a mission. You'll have to use that tanto as a model for the swords you carve out of these branches, and this time, she moved into his field of vision to meet his eyes. You will use a kunai. Unorthodox thinking is helpful, but it is important to know every inch of your weapon before you begin training with it. You will have an easier time of it, at least, but I look forward to seeing the results. By the 20th, the replica should be perfect." Sasuke nodded and sat down outside the dojo as Naruto's protests were continually met with Kakashi's calm explanations or the retribution of the staff. Leaning back, he drew the screen away so Naruto could see him, and raised a hand in acknowledgement. Though he couldn't see Naruto's response, he did hear another soft clunk and Kakashi admonishing him to pay attention to your stance, Naruto. But the comment was made without any real venom, so the group continued in that manner for the rest of the afternoon. There was a small crisis when evening fell and both boys realized they did in fact have school the next day. While neither were strangers to skipping class for one reason or another, the realization that they had both grandstanded in front of the entire village and would then have to endure the avalanche of questions from classmates was a daunting one. Sasuke seriously considered barricading himself in the Uchiha estate to ward off the girls. Oh gods, the girls were going to be insufferable. After the Anbu reminded them that yes, they were still obligated to go to class and no, they were not allowed to talk about the many things the third Hokage and Kakashi had shared with them, both boys shared a look of mingled dread and resignation. In that moment of inattention, Kakashi quietly slipped Kat a roll of paper which she hid in her belt. A ninja does not run away. Kat reminded Naruto as she walked him back to his apartment along dusty and thinly populated streets, hidden under a genjutsu of an elderly woman. I wasn't gonna run away, Kat-san. I just don't know what I'll say when Kiba or Shikamaru-san ask questions, or when Ino and Sakura-san get angry because they think I embarrassed their Sasuke. He said the last two words in a mocking voice as Kat hid a snort of laughter behind her own mask. I didn't realize the competition had already started. Oh yeah, the girls have been swooning over Sasuke for ages, and he doesn't even do anything or talk to them. But they're all, oh he's so mysterious, and tragic, and the best at everything. Jealousy does not become you, Uzumaki-san. Well, what do you suggest I do? Everybody's going to be angry at me and think Sasuke's cool, because that's the way it's always been. Now I know why, but I can't even talk about it, you know. Kat nodded. There is much in Anbu we are officially forbidden to speak of, even to our closest friends. Like your boyfriend. Kakashi said you were dating. Another thing to berate him for, sighed Kat. But perhaps I can lend you some advice, Uzumaki-san. Find one of your enemies and make them an ally. If these girls are so set on Uchiha-san, perhaps one of them can be used to drive the rest away. Naruto frowned as he contemplated this and as they turned onto his street. His apartment loomed in the darkness and he looked back at Kat with a mixture of uncertainty and fear. You guys'll come back, right? Kat nodded. Owl is on the night shift. Hound and I will be back tomorrow. You will not see me, but I suspect Hound will be a bit more conspicuous. Naruto's grin was back on his face and he nearly bounced along the street until Kat held out her hand to stop him. For the sake of formality, I shall inspect your dwelling just as Hound did for Uchiha-san. But you guys have been following me for years, complained Naruto, who was by now missing his bed. Shouldn't you have done that like, last week or earlier? Kat deliberately angled her face so the empty eye holes of her mask bored into him. You didn't throw a kunao at Lord Danzo last week. An important distinction. Naruto gulped and handed her the apartment key. Kat silently moved through the stairwell as Naruto followed, swooping through his door in half of the space before Naruto had even put one foot on the landing. Kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, all areas where a disabled paper bomb or subtle knife might be left as a threat. The Hokage knew Danzo placed too high a priority on Konoha's Jinchuriki to have him killed, but Kat knew the head of the Anbu was also not above sending a pointed message. And the brat had somehow wormed his way into her tightly clad heart in the space of a day. Of course, having to sit on the roof and listen to him and Kakashi sob at one another also had something to do with it. The roll of paper came out and she scribbled out her report with a discarded pencil just as Naruto closed the door behind him. Perfect. She shoved the scrap back into her belt, but Naruto was rubbing his eyes and already shrugging off his jacket. Thanks a bunch, Kat-san, but I'm gonna go to bed now, he trailed off as he moved past her towards his bedroom, shedding sandals and exhaustion like autumn leaves, as Kat bowed and used a quiet body flicker to disappear out the window to the opposite roof. She silently measured the distance between the orange spray paint and Naruto's window and shook her head as Owl appeared for his shift. A jump like that, in the rain and with almost no chakra control, the Uchiha really were something else. Check the description for the links to the author.